Hi, my name is Garrison Time, and for my case study, we're going to be going over mental illness. So mental illness is something that affects an extremely large portion of our population, and there's not a lot that we know about it. Especially for people in my demographic of being a 20-year-old college student, mental illness is a very large factor in our lives. Making sure that we are mentally okay and mentally stable is very hard for someone who's living a high stressful, high intense life, doing a lot of different things with a lot of different people, and making sure everything is okay mentally is probably the most important part of succeeding in a college career. But since mental illness is such a very broad statement, there's a lot of different factors and features that go into it. So today, during this presentation, we're going to be diving into what mental illness is, how we can treat it, and the details behind what it entails. What is mental illness? So the definition of mental illness is a wide variety of illnesses that can affect things like your mood, thinking, or behavior. So mental illness, although being a very large and broad statement, can be specified as certain things like anxiety and depression, eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia, ADD or ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or OCD. So like I previously stated, there's a lot more mental illnesses that actually exist. But the fact that I only named 6 and there's a lot more mean that there's very different and very polarized opinions in what actually mental illness actually is. Signs of mental illness. So, like previously stated, mental illness does not have a set in stone thing as to what it could actually be. Just because you're feeling upset doesn't mean that you have a mental illness. Just because you're feeling like you're stressed out doesn't mean you have a mental illness. But the fact is, if you have these reoccurring feelings or states of being, that's what says that you possibly could have some kind of mental illness. So some of these things are like extreme mood changes, feeling sad or low, significant tiredness, reduced ability to concentrate, significant tiredness or low energy, inability to cope with daily problems with stress, and suicidal thoughts. Now, suicidal thoughts is probably the most prevalent of saying that you could have some kind of mental illness. Most people who actually have a mental illness turn to actually suicide. And the fact that if you are feeling that kind of apathy for doing something of that nature, it could mean that you have something that could be possibly wrong with your mental state. So, again, there's not really a general cause as to what mental illness, what could actually happen to you having mental illness. But there's some things that could actually, lead to you having mental illness, like genetics. So say that your mother or father has some kind of mental illness, the odds of you having one are a lot higher than someone who's never had one in their family. Mental illnesses could be an acute or ongoing cause. So an acute cause means it's something sudden and short, like you just failed an exam. An ongoing cause could be something like an injury, or if you have family struggles that have been going on since you were little, poverty, a death in the family, you have a history of substance abuse. And the thing is with mental illness that's very interesting is that a mental illness can be something that could be temporary or it could last your whole life. There's really no timetable or set in stone factor to saying that yes, I have a mental illness and that I'm going to recover in this amount of time or I'm going to have it for the rest of my life. There's really no barometer as to say when or where your mental illness could take place and end. So, like previously stated, mental illness is a very prevalent thing in our community. About 1 in 5 adults in the U.S., so about 43.8 million people, experience some kind of mental illness in a given year. Also, about 1 in 25 students in the United States, or approximately 9.8 million people, experience a serious mental illness that substantially interferes or limits one or more major life activities. So, mental illness could also approximately be about 1 in 5 of the youth-aged people, so people aged 13 to 18 experience some kind of serious mental illness in a given year. Mood disorders like depression and bipolar disorder are the third most common cause of hospitalization for the U.S. for both youth and adults aged 18 to 44 years old. So that mainly causes because of self-harm and suicide. So people who are depressed and have some kind of bipolar disorder of some severity turn to self-harm and suicide, which can lead to you being hospitalized to recover from whatever you actually did to harm yourself. So these two charts here just give some numbers as to what our barometer is for mental health in America. So for children and teens, you have about 20% of youth ages being impacted with some kind of health disease or mental illness. 11% of the youth have some kind of mood disorder. 50% of all lifetime causes of mental illness begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24. So just from these two charts alone, you can see how mental illness is a very large factor in our American population and how it can affect a lot of different people at any time throughout their lives. So I attached a number for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So this administration is a 24-hour public line service that can help anyone who has some kind of mental illness. So if you know someone that has some kind of mental illness, this number is very helpful to talk about their problems and issues rather than them dealing with it alone. Mental illness is a very serious problem with us, and if you have no one to talk to, then at least these people who are trained to de-escalate problems and to just be there for a lending hand can really help someone out who has mental illness. Now, since mental illness is a very broad topic, we'll be specifically talking about ADHD. ADHD is a very common medical condition that a lot of people have, specifically kids, but not a lot of people really know what it is and how to go about it. So right now we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper as well. What is ADHD? So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. A person with ADHD has differences in brain development in which causes a person to not be able to sit still, pay attention, and self-control. So ADHD has three different types of levels to it. So it's an inattentive type, a hyperactive/impulsive type, and a combined type. So the inattentive type, this is pretty self-explanatory. It means that the person who has it doesn't pay close attention to details, has problems staying focused on tasks, does not seem to listen when spoken to, and has problems organizing tasks when doing work. So a hyperactive or impulsive type fidgets or taps with hands and feet, not able to sit still, they're unable to do tasks quietly, and they're extremely talkative. When a combined type, like the name, it's a combination of both. So the scope of ADHD. So in 2016, there was recorded 6.1 million American children reported with ADHD. So according to this chart has 6.4 million amount of children who have ADHD from the ages of 4 to 17. So basically, this means that this kind of condition is happening at an increasing rate over the years. A lot more people are being diagnosed with ADHD every single year, and there's really no barometer as to when we could stop. ADHD is a lot more common in guys than it is in girls. It's nearly triple the amount likely for a guy to be diagnosed with ADHD than a girl. Boys are diagnosed with ADHD at around 13.2%, where girls are only down to 5.6%. The average age of ADHD is around 7 years old, so mainly people who are getting diagnosed with ADHD is children. So what is ADHD and how does it actually happen and what does it mean to a person? So ADHD is mostly passed through due to genetics. So if a parent has ADHD, then their child has more than 50% chance of getting it themselves. So the brains of people who have ADHD are slightly different than people around it. So a study has proven that the brains as a whole is slightly smaller than with a person who has ADHD in comparison to someone who actually doesn't have ADHD. So there's about 5 different parts of the brain in which the brain is actually a little bit smaller and doesn't work as efficiently. So the caudate nucleus, the putamen, the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. So all 5 of these regions are actually slightly smaller than the regions of the normal person. The amygdala and the hippocampus are involved with the regulation and control of emotions. So if these regions are not as developed as the normal person, then it contributes to ADHD and the fact that their moods can sometimes be erratic. And if their moods are erratic, then they're definitely going to get diagnosed with something like that, especially at a young age when they're supposed to be level and not as hyperactive all the time. Also, there's less blood flow to the prefrontal area of the brain, which is responsible for planning, organization, paying attention, memory, and emotional reactions. All of these different things are very important in diagnosing someone with ADHD. If they can't pay attention in class, or they forget a lot, or they have serious mood swings, and they can't, maintain their time or manage their time, then there's definitely some kind of mental stigma going on with them. So also the neurotransmitter dopamine is not regulated as well. Either there's too much dopamine in the brain, not enough receptors for the dopamine, or the dopamine is not being used correctly in the brain, which we'll go into a little more detail later on in the PowerPoint. Medication and treatment. So many people with ADHD have a combination of either behavioral therapy and medication to cope with the condition. This therapy normally is just used to teach the kids to make the right choices and behaviors in certain situations. Also, a lot of times the therapy can be used for the parents of these kids with ADHD in order to give them tips and tricks to get positive reinforcement for their good behaviors. Because if there's positive reinforcement for their good behaviors, then there's less likely to be the bad ones. There's two different types of medication that's normally used for treatment of ADHD. There's either a stimulant or a non-stimulant. So a stimulant works by increasing the dopamine level in the brain. So back to dopamine. Dopamine is associated with the motivation, pleasure, attention, and movement. So it can boost concentration and reduce those hyperactive characteristics that they're normally having. There's also non-stimulants, which boost the levels of norepinephrine. Non-stimulants are normally used when the stimulants aren't actually working. Most people with ADHD are immediately prescribed with a stimulant, and if a non-stimulant is normally that second step if it doesn't work. Also, the best thing about non-stimulants in comparison to stimulants is that they have antidepressant characteristics. So if a person who has ADHD is having some kind of depressive quality, then a non-stimulant is the perfect thing because it doesn't affect their mood and depression. Now, in terms of exercise, a person with ADHD can exercise just as well as anyone who is considered normal. There's no restrictions for someone who has ADHD, and they can do literally anything that a quote-unquote normal person could do. The only thing that I think that would actually help someone with ADHD is to make sure that they're actually focused on whatever they're working on. Since ADHD is a hyperactive disorder, there's a lot of times where their attention's wandering off and they're not as active in whatever they're doing. So my recommendation is that people who have ADHD, I would avoid them having long distance cardiovascular training. I wouldn't make them run longer than a mile or for 30 minutes, because if they run longer than that, then their attention span is going to wander and they're not going to put in that effort as they should be putting into their workout. Also, with flexibility, in terms of flexibility, I wouldn't let them hold a pose or a stance or stretch for that long, because again, they can lose focus and they wouldn't be doing the proper thing, and that could also lead to injury. So thank you for listening to my presentation about ADHD and mental illness, and I hope that this has helped you educate yourself in the topic, and have a good day.